This is Outbreak News This Week, brought to you by the Global Dispatch Incorporated. Outbreak News This Week is your source for all the news about worms and germs. And now, your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com. Here's Robert Herriman.
Well, good day, Tampa Bay. And for everybody watching on Facebook Live, this is our first time, and I hope you enjoy it. It's been a few glitches, but I think we're up and running now. And we are in the AM 1830 The Biz studios in a very much cooler Tampa Bay area. And I want to always start out with encouraging you to check out the website. It's OutbreakNewsToday.com, OutbreakNewsToday.com, a great source for all your news about worms and germs. And check us out on Facebook at Infectious Disease News on the Facebook page. Well, I want to go ahead and start off the show with what was one of the bigger stories in the past couple weeks, and it came out of Southern California. And here's a news clip from KTVN Channel 2. Michael, play that clip.
Tonight at 11 o'clock, California health officials say a child has died from an extremely rare infection that may have come from a popular hot springs. Inyo County officials say the child from Southern California may have been exposed to the infection at the Hot Ditch Water Ponds. This is just south of Bishop. The infection, known as PAM, or the brain-eating amoeba, typically enters the body through the nose while a person is swimming. Now, it is the second case of the PAM linked to untreated water in Inyo County in recent years.
All right. Just to give the audience a little review, a little primer on Naegleria fowleri, it's a microscopic amoeba, a parasite. And it's a single-celled living organism. It's commonly found in warm, fresh water, such as lakes and rivers and ponds and canals and hot springs. It causes a pretty rare and devastating infection of the brain known as primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, commonly known as PAM. People become infected when water that's contaminated with Naegleria fowleri, this parasite, enters the nose, typically while swimming or diving, some way in which the water rushes up the nose. You can't get it from drinking water, and it's not found in salt water. Now, infections happen when it goes through the nose, like I mentioned, and it travels to the brain, and it basically starts destroying brain tissue. And a good percentage, 97, 98% of the time, it is a fatal infection. It's often seen when it's hot out for prolonged periods of time. There's higher water temperatures and thus lower water levels where the amoeba can be stirred up. While most exposures occur from contaminated recreational water, there are also documented cases from using items like neti pots and people that do ritual nasal rinsing for their religions. There's been a case from somebody who got it from a slip and slide from using the house tap water. Now, according to the CDC, only 4 people out of 143 infected between 1962 and 2017 in the U.S. have survived. So it's a pretty high case fatality rate. When you're looking at the symptoms, we're looking at pretty rapid onset within a week. Initial symptoms will be very reminiscent of bacterial meningitis or viral meningitis, the headache, fever, the nausea, the vomiting, and then, of course, the stiff neck. And it gets worse. Confusion, seizures, hallucinations, and after the symptoms really kick in, the degree of the disease progresses pretty rapidly. Okay, that's enough on the intro. How about my guest today? I have a very, very special guest today who drove in from Orlando, and his name is Steve Smelski. And Steve is the father of a young boy named Jordan Smelski. And unfortunately, about 4 years ago, Jordan passed away from primary amoebic meningoencephalitis at the age of 11. Right.
Yes.
So I'm honored to have Steve here. Steve's here today to tell his story, tell Jordan's story, and discuss the work of the Jordan Smelski Foundation for Amoeba Awareness. Thanks, Steve, for sparing your time to come out here all the way to Tampa and sharing your very personal story and very important topic.
Thank you, Robert.
You bet. So let's go ahead and start, Steve, with what happened. What's the story with what happened to Jordan? And if you want to talk about Jordan as a person also, please do.
Okay. In 2014, school finished up and Jordan graduated the 5th grade. Jordan was 11 and a half when we went on vacation. He was pretty active, loved his friends, loved soccer. He was a very good goalie. He loved playing baseball, and he loved playing video games with his friends. So we always did at least one nice vacation every year. And in 2011, we'd been to Costa Rica, and we had a great time. And we ended up taking him back in 2014. And actually, Jordan was a very good horseman. We went horseback riding several times, and he'd scare us, but he was actually very good on a horse. And he liked to go ziplining. And in Costa Rica, they got some great places to go ziplining.
Sure.
And the last day we were at the one resort in the RNL area, he and I spent the afternoon in a swimming pool that was filled with hot spring water, and it had a water slide. And we'd swam in it 3 years before in 2011. Nothing happened. Had no idea it wasn't chlorinated. And the Amoeba Naegleria fowleri was in the water that day, and it went up his nose. And by the time we returned home, he was quite sick, and took him to the hospital, and he died 7 days and 12 hours after we swam. So that's kind of what happened to Jordan in a nutshell, and that's kind of what led us to start the foundation. So.
Sure. Can you tell the audience about your experience dealing with the hospital and the medical professionals with this fairly rare amoeba?
Sure. We'd heard about the brain-eating amoeba. I don't know that I was ever, or Shelly was ever aware of the technical name of Naegleria fowleri. Everybody, the press calls it the brain-eating amoeba, and they get more attention that way, I think, when they use it. So we knew about it because there had been 3 cases in Orlando in 2007. I don't think I ever Googled it until after Jordan died. I knew it was in the water. We knew not to swim in the lakes. And that day we swam, he went down the slide probably 5 or 6 times. The water jetted up his nose. You couldn't go down the slide without having it go up your nose. And the following day he had a headache, and we gave him some Motrin. We were in Costa Rica, so we took Motrin with him in case he did have a headache. The second day after swimming, so we swam on a Tuesday. On Thursday, we had a down day back in San Jose, and he complained of the headache, and he actually didn't want to go out of the room much. He just wanted to lay in the bed and play some video games, so we gave him some more Motrin. The next day was Friday, and we caught a flight back to Orlando in the morning, and it took us a while to get through customs, and Jordan he wanted American food when we got back, so we took some takeout on the way home. And he said he didn't feel good, and the headache was a little bit worse, so we continued giving him Motrin. Saturday morning, he got up. He seemed pretty good in the morning, but by afternoon Saturday, he was just laying around. He complained of a headache, and by Saturday night, he complained of a stiff neck. So we were starting to get concerned, and then we put him to bed, and the vomiting started soon after he went to bed. He vomited all night long. Shelly and I took turns with him, and we both agreed that if it wasn't better in the morning, we were going to take him to the emergency room in the morning. So we took him to the emergency room on Sunday morning, and we made everybody aware that we've been out of country. We've been around some horses. We've been in hot spring water. And he said, well, because of the stiff neck, that's a good sign it could be some type of meningitis. So we agreed and gave him the permission to go ahead and do the spinal tap, the lumbar puncture. And the fluid came out. It was clear, and they said that's a good thing. It doesn't look like it's bacterial meningitis. So then they did a CT scan, and that came back and said, well, It looks like he's got viral meningitis. He looks like he's doing okay. Probably nothing will come out of it. You'll probably take him home in 3 to 5 days. So they went ahead and admitted him on Sunday afternoon, and he didn't really have a good night on Sunday night. He complained of nauseousness and still wasn't feeling well. They'd given him something for the vomiting, but he couldn't keep anything down. So he wanted a Coke so bad. He kept asking us if he could have a Coke, and they said no because he couldn't keep it down. We got up Monday. He actually seemed pretty good during the day. Shelly slept some, and I laid on the bed with him. We talked about the vacation and how we thought it was the best one that we'd been on. Talked about what we were going to do the rest of the summer. And then things got worse Monday, probably about 6 o'clock, and he started complaining. The doctor or the nurse would ask, what's the level of your headache? And most of the time it was a 2 or a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. Well, he said it was a 6 or a 7 by 6 p.m. on Monday evening. And it wasn't 3 hours later, and the hallucination started. And just before the hallucination started, he complained that it was a 10 on a scale. He goes, Dad, I can't stand it. My head hurts so bad. So we went out to see if we could get him some more pain medication. And they said no. Couldn't give him anything more for like another hour, hour and a half. I said, he's not going to make it. So they went ahead and gave him some morphine. And it couldn't have been 10 seconds after they started the morphine and the IV drip that his pupils dilated. And he thought he saw bugs crawling on the ceiling. We were looking at the controls on the side of his bed, and he goes, Dad, there's the iTunes store. Can you download that game I kept asking for? And I'm like, Jordan, what are you talking about? And he looked at Shelly, and he goes, oh, Mom, look at this restaurant. All the tables are set for 3, for you, me, and Dad. And we're like, Jordan, I mean, we were starting to get scared. Mm-hmm. So after about an hour and a half of that, he started to have uncontrollable movements, his arms and his legs, and they had 2 IVs in him. So we actually got on the bed to hold his arms and legs down to keep the IVs in. He hallucinated for 3.5 hours, and the last hour was horrible. We couldn't keep him still, and he started getting this look at us like he had no idea who we were. And at the end of the 3.5 hours, he looked at us. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who we were. And then he had a seizure. He arched his back and he leaned over on his side. Just at that time, they brought the ICU team in. I'd gone out 2 or 3 times trying to get the nurse to come in and bring doctors in. And they brought the ICU team in just as he had the seizure. And he aspirated into his lungs, and they were able to get it out fairly quickly. And thank God they were there, because I don't think Shelly and I could have gotten it cleared in time. And they put him on another gurney. They took him downstairs to the ICU, and his sodium level was low. So they gave him some IVs to get the sodium level back up, and he seemed to stabilize within like an hour or 2. And this is like 3 in the morning, and we hadn't had much sleep. And so we caught a little bit of sleep, and they did the grand rounds in the morning, and they came in and they said, well, it looks like it's going to be a little bit longer, but you're going to be taking him home. It'll probably be 2 to 3 weeks. He's doing better. He's stable now. And he was in a coma at that time. And it wasn't until later on Tuesday evening that they said, we're worried about the pressure inside the cranium, and we're worried that it'll push down in the brainstem. And they were getting very concerned about that. And he hadn't opened his eyes. We kept talking to him, and they said, when they're hallucinating like that, they can still hear. So we kept talking into his ear, trying to stay in touch with him. And they finally recommended that we bring in a neurosurgeon to drill a little hole in the top of the skull and relieve the pressure. And in that sample of CSF fluid is when they found the amoeba. And that's when we found out what it was. So they came in and told us that they found it. And at first we were like, oh, awesome, now you know what it is and you can kill it. And then they said it was the brain-eating amoeba, and then we realized there was probably not going to be any hope. So at that point, they called the CDC. They ordered the drug miltefosine from the CDC in Atlanta, and they sent it on the way. We got some more sleep. They woke us up at 6 and said he was all the way. There was no way they could keep him going without manually resuscitating him until the drug arrived. And they asked us what we wanted to do. So we both reached out to our families, and nobody can give you that advice. So we asked the doctor what he would do, and he said, no, I wouldn't if it was my son. So we all gathered around his bed, and they took him off the respirator, and they took off some of the IVs, and within a couple minutes he took his last breath. And Shelly and I were each holding a hand. I think we had 8 of her family and friends there, and he passed away about 6 hours after we found out what it really was. So based on that experience, we went back to the hospital a couple weeks later. And Jordan's our only son, and we went from a 11-and-a-half-year-old boy graduated from elementary, getting ready to go into middle school, to empty nesters in less than a week. And we weren't prepared for it. The grief part was horrible. And yet, at some point, realized that we had to do something. And we started Googling, and we found other foundation pages and Facebook pages where people had, and then Hot Springs were on almost every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, we didn't know hot springs were dangerous.
Sure.
So we went back and decided to start a foundation. I had owned 3 businesses in the past, so we actually put a foundation together in Florida. And in Florida, you can't, until you're approved by the IRS as a tax exempt, you can't solicit. So I actually opened a second one in New York, because in New York you can, and I've got family members there. So we actually started 2 foundations, and then we approached the hospitals. We spoke with All Children's, Johns Hopkins, and then we spoke with Florida Hospital for Children. And we asked them if they would work with us. And we ended up coming up with the idea to put a PAM summit together at the end of, actually, September of 2015. And it took us 6 months to pull that together, find the experts that we wanted to bring in. And Kaylee Hardig had lived in 2013. Right. So Dr. Matt Lynham came in. We had Dr. Jennifer Cope. They'd both been critical components into that whole successful outcome. Mm-hmm. And we held the PAM Summit. And during the training, Sheila Black, who was the lab technician for Florida Hospital, was in that first initial PAM Summit. And she ended up being the lab technician on duty when Sebastian De Leon came in 10 months later. So that's kind of where it went from there.
Yeah. Steve, let me piggyback on your experience at the hospital. When they thought that it was viral meningitis, did the question, based on his symptoms, did the question of did he have exposure to fresh water ever come up?
Only when we brought it up. So we had said we'd been out of country, been swimming in hot springs, we've been riding horses, we'd gone through an animal. They had wild animals in cages and stuff from Costa Rica, which we hadn't seen before. So we'd been around a lot of different things. We had no idea what it was at that point. But yes, we did bring it up, and at that point, I don't think it raised any flags.
Yeah. Now, I've interviewed other parents that had to suffer through this horrible situation, and I understand this is really a very tight-knit, small community. You really get to know these other parents, and you could all really relate. Can you talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure. We've reached out to several families. In fact, we've had them reach out to us after they found our Facebook page and website during their ordeal, asking what they should do. And it is tight-knit because so few people know much about Naegleria fowleri or PAM that you reach out to whoever you think knows the most, and you're trying to figure out if you've got a chance, what do I have to do? What drugs do I have to get? What's the treatment? Do we have any chance at all? And so the group kind of sticks together. There's a couple closed Facebook pages, and we share information. A lot of people start a Facebook page and try and do awareness, and dealing with the grief is very, very difficult. I can understand why after a little while, it's like, I can't do it.
Yeah, but some of these organizations have been around a while. I mean, I can remember years ago, the Kyle Cares I'm sure that's still around, right?
It is.
Yeah.
We actually reached out to Jeremy and Julie, and we talked to him quite a bit.
Yeah.
And he came and participated in the initial PAM Summit.
Steve, what advice would you have for parents taking their kids to freshwater to play and swim and do whatever? Do you have a different perspective on that now?
Well, we actually didn't think we were putting Jordan at risk. We live on a lake and never let him swim in it, and we still lost him. We were at a resort, and it never occurred to us that hot springs could be dangerous, and we didn't know it wasn't chlorinated. If you ask us, would we ever let him swim knowing what we've been through? Absolutely not. So everybody calls it very rare, and you let your guard down and say, well, what happened to me? Well, it's rare until it does happen to you, and then it's not rare at all. So what we've been frustrated about is that in the United States, only 3 states are required to be reported. So nobody has to report about it. Nobody has to go back and find it. They don't share the information. They don't have to share it. And you wonder, how many cases are there really? Everybody says it's very, very, very rare. You don't have to worry about it because of all the millions of people that swim every year in the United States. But how many cases do we really know? Because it looks like viral meningitis. It looks like bacterial meningitis. And early on, the symptoms look like the flu. And everybody says, well, don't just rush your child to the hospital if it's a flu. You don't have to do. It's like, this looks like the flu, and you got to rush them there. Because within 4.5 days, you're in serious trouble, and you don't even know it.
Yeah, I know. Speaking personally, I've never. My daughter's grown now, but I never took her to any fresh water. Let's talk. We got a couple minutes before the break. Can you give the audience a little summary of the foundation? And the link to the foundation is jordansmelskifoundation.org. If you want to just talk a little bit about what you guys are trying to do, and then we'll get into some more details.
Sure. When we started the foundation, we wanted to try and save somebody. Awareness is awesome, and parents need to know, but at the same time, we'd never know if we made a difference. So while our mission is global awareness, but we also want to educate and help the medical professionals and educate them on how to find this. So as a board, we've got 7 members on the board now. We started with 6, and they're either relatives or close friends of ours that we work with. They're people that we respect and trust. And when we put the foundation together, our mission was to choose items that we thought could make a difference and save a life. It's a big list because there's very, very little research that's been done on Naegleria. But what we wanted to do was pick items from the initial investments or funding that we did from the donations that we had received, was to pick something that we thought could make a difference immediately or to save a life. So that's what we've focused on. And we've actually had a few things that were pretty interesting as we got into them.
Yeah, I do have a question on Facebook, and somebody's asking, the drug's name is miltefosine, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, miltefosine is actually approved for treating a different parasite called leishmaniasis.
That's correct.
And it's still considered experimental for the free-living amoeba, Balamuthia, Naegleria.
That's correct.
Yeah.
However, it's actually been used in the last 3 successful cases of outcomes of PAM. So miltefosine was developed in Germany. It was a German drug. And I think it was actually initially developed for breast cancer. And they found that some drugs actually are effective against some of these free-living amoebas. And in the U.S. now, it's actually marketed under Impovido. It's still considered miltefosine. But Impovido is provided by Profound Incorporated. They're out of Orlando.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the hard break. So I want to, again, encourage you to check out the website, outbreaknewstoday.com, for all your news about worms and germs. Check out the website, jordansmelskifoundation.org. And after the break, we're going to have more with Steve Smelski. See you then. Okay, so what we're going to do is, this is where they normally have the weather and the news and whatever in between parts of the show. But since this is pre-recorded, we record the show every Thursday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and it airs in the Tampa Bay area Sundays at 1 p.m. And you can also find it streaming online at 1380thebiz.com. And so we'll go ahead and start in the second half momentarily. Send them through Facebook, and we'll see if we can get them on air.
Welcome back to Outbreak News This Week, your source for all the news about worms and germs. Here's your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Herriman.
Well, welcome back to the program. Got a very special show today. We're doing it on Facebook Live, and of course, I will be publishing it as a podcast on Sunday on the Outbreak News Interviews podcast page. And my guest today is Steve Smelski. He is the father of Jordan Smelski, a young boy who lost his life to the parasite Naegleria fowleri 4 years ago. And Steve is, in the first half, gave us the story of what happened, the situation at the hospital, how Jordan contracted it, and some other details. And in the second half, I want to talk with Steve a little bit about some of the work that the foundation is doing. And how I first got any connection with Steve was he contacted me about 2 weeks ago, and he was encouraging me to get out this new video they published. And it's a 1 hour video on lab detection of Naegleria. And I know I have people in the audience that are clinical laboratory scientists, medical technologists, and it's very, very good. And I will link to it when I publish the podcast on Sunday. So I encourage you to check it out. It's because I've been in the laboratory field for decades. I'm an old man. I've been doing this for a long time. Never saw this parasite. So it's very, very informative, and particularly if you live in more of a high-risk type area like Florida or Texas, where half of the cases have been found. All right, Steve, well, let's go ahead and talk about that video. You put out this 1 hour lab detection video. It features some medical technologists, microbiologists who explain different procedures. It has a clip from Dr. Jennifer Cope from the CDC, somebody that I've interviewed on the show a couple times. And you and Shelly speak on it. You want to talk about that video?
Sure. So the thing that bothered us as we looked through Jordan's case is there's no early detection test available today. There's no place where you can take a blood test or CSF test and say, okay, that's Naegleria, start treatment. So we spoke with Florida Hospital for Children, some of their lab techs, some of the ED physicians, same thing, Dr. Benoit from Johns Hopkins Health Children's. We tried to come up with an idea of some things that we could put into a video that would be informative for lab techs. I don't think any of them got trained on anything about Naegleria. Usually there's 1 or 2 paragraphs in a medical book, and that's all they cover it.
That is it.
So we wanted to come up with a video that would take a look at the last 2 positive outcomes, Kaylee Hardy's case and Sebastian De Leon's case. So we reached out and we asked Sheila Black, who is the lab technician. She actually attended the initial PAM summit, and she listened to Dr. Lynham talk about Kaylee's case, we listened to Dr. Drainer from Nemours. He had actually He's a pathologist. He'd actually done one of the autopsies on one of the Minnesota cases. He had talked about what to look for and how difficult it is to find afterwards. So we incorporated that into an outline, and the foundation approved it, and we decided to go ahead and fund it. So Sheila agreed to be the host for the video, and we took a short clip that Florida Hospital for Children did on Sebastian's case, and we included that for a positive outcome. And then we followed that up with a shorter version it's about a 10-minute version of Jordan's story, just to let them know what they're up against, what a good outcome is, what happens if we're not looking for it. And then Sheila, and then we invited Frankie Johns, who was the lab technician who identified the amoeba in Kaylee Hardy's case.
That was in Arkansas.
That's correct. And Frankie covered the stains. Most of the time they use a gram stain, and that actually kills the amoeba and makes it very difficult to see. And she talks about using a right Giemsa stain, which is how you can actually see the amoeba. And then Sheila talked about direct microscopy and actually seeing movement as you warm up the sample underneath the microscope. Right. And we actually included video from Jordan's amoeba and from Sebastian's case. So they got video of both, and they're actually in the training video. Yeah. Right now, those are the only two ways a lab tech can actually detect it early enough to start treatment. And doctors don't have a clue, and it's actually invasive treatment. And I don't think any parent would consent to it unless you actually knew what you're up against.
Right. Yeah, fascinating video. And again, I encourage everybody to check that out. And I will put up the link on the website. So, yeah, that video, that video was really, really good. Steve, we talked about miltefosine, and I've talked to Todd McLaughlin in the past. He's the CEO of Profunda. And I can remember he was telling me one story where he got a call from South Carolina a couple years ago, and he basically got in the car and drove the medicine all the way up to South Carolina, but still it was too late in that particular case.
Correct.
But he also delivered it directly to the Sebastian De Leon case, which was just down the street, I imagine.
Fortunately, that was right there in the same city.
So that really worked out. But you're doing some work with Todd McLaughlin at Profunda. Can you talk about that?
Sure. One of the top 10 items that we came up with was the issue was the drug was only in Atlanta. And by the time you put the drug on a flight, especially, so in Jordan's case, everything seemed to get worse late in the evening, which meant there were no flights out of Atlanta to get him to where you are. And by the time you got a flight to the West Coast or even the Southeast Coast out of Atlanta, there's so much damage done in those few hours that it takes to get the drug there that the patient doesn't actually have a chance. Our idea was trying to get the drug locally. I think Jeremy initially reached out to Todd and tried to get it, and they got it into the state of Texas. And then we've been working with Todd to get it in as many hospitals in Florida as we possibly can. I think there's 6 right now that actually have it in their pharmacy. So there's no reason not to have it because it is approved for leishmaniasis. But if you have a PAM case, you cannot wait for that drug to be driven or flown to you. If you look at the outcome from Kaylee Hardy's case, she had to have the drug flown to Arkansas before she was given the drug. She went through like 50 weeks of physical therapy.
I remember that.
Sebastian was actually the first one to actually swallow the pill. It's an oral pill, and he actually swallowed it before they induced the coma, and he went through 2 weeks of physical therapy. So those 6 to 8 hours are a difference of 48 weeks of physical therapy. That's how much damage are done in just a few hours.
Oh, yeah, rapidly progressive. Can you tell the audience, in case they're not aware, what's the purpose of the coma?
So in Jordan's case, after they found it,
the induced coma, I mean.
The induced coma. Yeah. So in Jordan actually went into the coma himself because he actually had the seizure. So we now know all of that damage is caused during the hallucinations. You'll see the pupils dilate, and then they don't make sense. And almost every case has those type of, I guess I didn't always say hallucinations, but not making sense. So by inducing the coma, the idea is to lower the body temperature. In Sebastian's case, they lowered it, I think it was like 90 degrees. And they started lowering Jordan's body temperature. The idea is to slow the amoeba down because it prefers very hot temperatures. The pool that Jordan and I swam in was 103 degrees. And we now know from some of the research that we funded that they can actually stay in the flagellate stage, which is the infectious stage, up over 120 Fahrenheit. So that's very hot water. In fact, you can't even stand to put your hand in 120 degrees, and yet it's just fine with it. So the idea is to induce the coma, lower the body temperature, and slow down the rapid. So the amoeba, it divides. That's how it spreads.
Right.
And so what you want to do is slow that down and slow down the damage of the tissue. And the idea is the lower temperature helps.
Yeah. You do an annual PAM summit, a primary amoebic meningoencephalitis summit, and the fourth annual one is coming up next April. Talk about that.
The initial idea for the PAM summit, nobody had done a summit or a meeting, a day-long meeting on just Naegleria and PAM. So our thought was there had to be some information out there that if we could share it with others would be beneficial. And at the time we didn't know it, but it actually helped in Sebastian's case. So we reached out to the CDC. We got Dr. Cope to agree to come in. Dr. Ibni Ali came in. We had Dr. Drainer from Nemours. We had Dr. Wanda Moa from All Children's Johns Hopkins here in St. Pete. We had Dr. Kyle was there, Dr. Francine Marciano Cabral. They've both done research on Naegleria for years. And then we asked Dr. Lynham to come in from the Arkansas case. And he actually, in the initial PAM summit, did a summary of the treatment that they did for Kaylee, why they suspected it, how they suspected it, how they found it in the lab. And we shared that information. And each year we've tried to change it a little bit more. We expand out. We've included other groups. This past, and during the third one, we actually had Sheila Black lead a group on just for lab techs. Part of the issue is we want to get all the healthcare systems involved with it. It's information that they should all have. The fact that there's been 2 cases in Minnesota should warn everybody that if it can happen in Minnesota, it can happen in any state in the country.
Absolutely.
So just because no state has a case doesn't mean that they are reported on one, doesn't mean that they haven't had one. They probably didn't know what they were looking at. It's almost always misdiagnosed. The only time it hasn't been misdiagnosed are in the positive outcomes.
So the summit that's going to occur in April, what's the general agenda there?
We'll have a keynote speaker. I'm not sure who that's going to be yet. We do different breakout sessions and so we'll have one live streamed, and that's usually in the main presentation hall, and we'll have different tracks. So we'll have one for ED physicians, lab technicians, and depending on your expertise or field, then you can go in there during some of those breakout sessions and hear different presentations and information that you're interested in. The idea is to share something that can actually help save a life.
Yeah, and that's going to be in Orlando?
Orlando.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that. You also raise a lot of money for different organizations, and one in particular is you raise money for the CDC to do research on it.
We did.
Yeah.
So we've worked with Dr. Cope and Dr. Ali for 3.5 years, and we kept asking about an early detection test because that's the only thing that's not available right now. And Dr. Ali had some ideas on developing a test. So we went ahead, I think we funded like 57% of the project, and we gave them $40,000, and they've been working on it. So it started back in, I think, June or July of this year, and it'll take 12 to 24 months, but if we don't start, we're never going to get one. And to me, that is the biggest thing that we need is some early form of detection, because it looks like viral meningitis and bacterial meningitis, and usually you don't find it until it's too late to treat and all the damage is already done.
And some of the other work that you guys have done at the Jordan Smelski Foundation is, this is really, really key. You funded a training class for ER doctors, basically.
We did.
I mean, how critical is that?
Very. So in the state of Florida, EMTs, emergency room physicians, they all have to do continuing education hours, and that training facility is actually in Orlando. So we reached out to them and asked them about funding a class on awareness of Naegleria and for detection of it. So Dr. Kevin Sharon, who's the health officer for Orange County of Florida, actually did a presentation on Naegleria with Jack Tracy's help, and Jack's actually joined our board and in the last 6 months. And we put that together with Jordan's same video that we used in the lab detection of Naegleria training video, to talk about Jordan's story, to make them aware of what it looks like when the symptoms start. You got to ask about freshwater exposure. And part of that gets back to adding a alert in the EMR system. So if you don't know to ask about freshwater exposure, then that's a problem. And so we've been trying to put this training together, and we funded it for a year. I just checked. It'll be up, I think, at the end of November, and we'll probably fund it again for another year. We've had several hundred EMTs and emergency room physicians actually watch it.
And if you want people in the audience to donate to the foundation, would they just go to the website?
Yes. If you go to, I think you gave them the www.jordansmelskifoundation.org.
That's right.
We own several different URLs. We also give out www.jordansmile.org. It's a little bit shorter and easier to remember. Mm-hmm. You can go to any of those, and there's a donate button on the main page.
Yeah.
We also have some of our other educational videos on there. So at I think it was the third PAM Summit, all the doctors that came in, the experts that we've been using to educate, we asked them to sit down and answer the top 40 questions on Naegleria and PAM.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I think we had to put it into 12 short videos, but every one of them took at least 2 questions. It was awesome. And you can actually hear it from the doctors.
Really good stuff. Great stuff that you're doing for the cause of amoeba awareness. You've also been working with Dr. Cabral up at Virginia Commonwealth.
Yes. At that first PAM Summit, I had never met Dr. Cabral. It's Dr. Francine Marciano Cabral. She's actually been testing in Naegleria in her lab for almost 30 years. And some of the other people that were in church, and I called her up and I said, "You didn't tell me." She goes, "Well, I didn't really want to, I didn't want to pressure you guys. I knew you had a lot of things you were working on." So we went ahead and funded 4 different topics this past, it's been about 16 months. And we funded the research with her, and she's just about ready to publish 3 of the 4. And we'll probably do another round of research with her. It's items that we think could save a life, or at least educate parents right away to let them know what the risk is. And we think it's well worth the funding.
Yeah, and it is great work and great research that they're doing. And if I remember correctly, you're probably not the only foundation that to insert an alert in their care pathway in case there's a freshwater exposure. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So when we first met with them after Jordan had passed away, we had our top 10 list. That was one of the ones on there, was to put some type of alert for the emergency room physician or the lab technicians to let them know that the patient that came in with some type of meningitis, whether it's viral, bacterial, and to put an alert in the system to let the lab tech know they've had freshwater exposure up the nose in the last 10 days. Now, in Jordan's case, he died in less than 8 days, but it was virulent. They didn't have the drug miltefosine or Impovido back then. I think they used amphotericin B as the main drug on it, which was the same as your case that I was asking about a couple weeks ago, the Spain case, because I think that's what they were using on that.
Protocol algorithm, that's got to help.
Yes. So Dr. Alejandro Jordan Villegas, who's with Florida Hospital, and Dr. Juan Dumois, who's with Johns Hopkins Children's. We did so out of that first PAM Summit, we actually had a team, I think there were 7 or 8 of the doctors that assembled together and worked all the way through that algorithm. So if you can think of a chart that if this, then this, if not, do this, it's just a flow chart. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what they want to share with the hospital. So we've tweaked it. They've tweaked it a few times. And I think I actually have a copy I could actually share with you. I'm pretty sure Dr. Dumois and Dr. Jordan would be happy to get it out to other hospitals.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. How about Steve? Do you mind? Would you like to talk couple minutes about Jordan?
Sure.
Yeah.
Jordan was always smiling. My brother used to call him the biggest ham he ever saw because there wasn't a picture that Jordan wouldn't like to get in front of the camera. And we've been blessed with we've got thousands of pictures that we posted on the Facebook page. And he had a beautiful smile. He cared about his family. He loved his friends. And he liked video games and he liked soccer. He was a very good goalie. And he had a couple really close friends, and 3 or 4 of them hung out. And Jordan was the type that if one of them were getting picked on, he'd get upset and he'd step in between them and he'd try and save his friend. He loved his mom, and he was very close to her. And I think she told him she loved him 3 or 4 times. He was swimming by the age of 2, and he liked going in the water. And we just said, if your friends go in the lake, you got to stay on the side of the lake. You can go in the pool afterwards, but we never let him go in, and we still lost him to it.
Okay, and again, I'm speaking to Steve Smelski, and he runs the Jordan Smelski Foundation, jordansmelskifoundation.org. I encourage you to check that out. A lot of great information there, and if you're interested in checking out some of the things they're doing, like the PAM Summit and the like, you can check that out. And if you want to donate to this great cause, you can do that at the website also. Any final thoughts, Steve, as we wind down, about a minute left?
I just want to tell everybody that we don't, everything we do is donated. So we donate our time. All of the donations go towards awareness, research, or training videos. And we choose the ones that we think can actually make a difference quicker. And we're going to continue on our journey. If you look at the website, Jordan did a special project for his 5th grade class. And in there, he said about the author. And he said, I've got 2 models in life, and that is, God only gives you 1 life to live, so you better use it well. And then he said, I've got another motto I like, and that's when life gives you lemons, you squeeze them back into life size. This means never give up. And at the time, we didn't realize, but I think he wrote that for us, and we're not going to give up. We're going to keep going.
Thanks for coming in today, Steve. I really appreciate it. God bless you and Shelly, and all you've gone through and all the work that you're doing now for this cause. And I want to thank the audience for listening and watching today. This is new, so sorry for all the fumbling and bumbling. And I will see you next week on Outbreak News This Week. Good day, and God bless.